In, and would all of you who are standing around the perimeter please take seats? We have what we hope will be an interesting session for you to hear, and also we are looking forward to your participation in discussion of this issue after you have heard the presentations by the two panelists and myself. I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists. The first gentleman over on the left there, blending into the background. I'm colorblind. Brown looks like red. Is Ernie Kinney from Fresno, California. Ernie was a teacher and/or school administrator for 30 years and has called since 1960. Has taught classes, several classes, during most of those years, and is still an active practitioner of teaching in the square dance business. He also is chairman of the CALLERLAB Committee on Dancing by Definition, and has both professional outside of the field of square dancing and long experience inside of the field of square dancing to bring to the subject of communication in teaching. The other panelist that you'll hear from today is Jack Murtha. Most of you know him as chairman of the... Yeah, you may applaud, it's all right. He's chairman of the Mainstream Committee and has been a long, hard worker for CALLERLAB. He also is a professional in the teaching business and has taught classes nearly continuously throughout his calling experiences, which began in 1954. I started calling before either of them and have been calling and teaching steadily since well before that. And well, it's interesting. We had a little conversation and concluded that between the three of us, we have taught well over 200 classes. And we think that gives us at least some hands-on experience as a basis for what we have to say today. I'm not going to try to deal with the details of the technical subject as both of them are able to, but I would like to start off by mentioning that the communication process is two-sided. There is a sender and a receiver. And it has been my observation as a teacher of square dancing over the past few years that the act of listening, the process of listening, is something that is not generally done well in our society. I turn out not to be the only one who has noticed this. I recently clipped an article out of the magazine Today's Office, which says the business of listening. And it points out one interesting comment. It's generally aimed at business communication, but let me read one paragraph. A costly irony emerges. What managers do most, they are liable to do worst. But managers aren't the only ones affected. Researchers have found that 70 to 80% of most people's waking time is spent communicating. Almost half of that time, 45%, is spent listening. Speaking is next, 36%, followed by reading, 16%, with writing, 9%, the trailing skill. Yet schools, including business schools, train people to read, write, and speak, but not to listen. In fact, we seldom receive any training in listening. It's often very true that people come to square dance classes without any real listening skill. They have not had in their lifetime to practice listening very much. Another company has noticed this and has paid a great deal of attention to it. Some of you may have seen the ads by the Sperry Company. They have been running for the last 5 years at least, a major campaign. Their slogan is, "We understand how important it is to listen." And they have put out a booklet, which is available to anyone that writes for it, on listening. They point out that it's a 4-step process. First of all, you must sense. The listeners must pay attention, discipline themselves. One thing that happens occasionally in square dance classes is that somebody shows up who has a hearing impairment, who has in fact a physical limitation on listening ability, and is unaware of it. This has happened to me at least every couple of years throughout my teaching experience, and it took me a number of years before I realized that it was something I should be looking for. Obviously, if somebody isn't able to hear, it's very difficult to teach them square dancing. Several people have discovered it through classes and have gone to do something about it, and fortunately there are things that can be done these days for most of those situations. Secondly, it's necessary not only to sense the sound, but also to interpret its meaning. We in square dancing use a different vocabulary, and that's part of what we're teaching, a very important part. The early stages of a square dance class are directed primarily at making people aware of the listening process and teaching them to take in information and to, in fact, understand it. Then the third characteristic of the listening process is evaluating, figuring out, am I the one that's supposed to be doing something here? Is it my turn to react? If we give a command to the heads, the sides will hear it too, but they need to pay some attention to whether they are the ones involved. And finally, the response, which indicates that the listening process has taken place and the person, dancer in our case, is able to respond properly to the calls that have been given. We very often tend to take, or it's easy in our business to take all of this for granted, to say people have been listening all their lives, and of course they know how to listen. That's not true. People have been listening all their lives, very often poorly. And it's important as teachers to be aware of that limitation and not to assume that everyone will be able to listen. In fact, I find that I spend a major portion of the first 10 lessons of the class not teaching calls, but teaching the listening process, making them aware of the fact that they must hear, that they must pay attention. Very few people are practiced at paying attention in that great a detail. One of the interesting examples of this was a student in one of the classes I had several years ago who was an airline pilot and was unable to attend because of his flight schedule regularly. He came every other week. And it was fascinating to me to watch him learn many times faster than any of the other people in the class. As a pilot, I know why. Because they listen constantly on the radio to multiple conversations going on against a noisy background and have trained themselves to pay attention and to be able to select from that noise level the things that are important to them. That's a learned skill, and we as teachers of square dancing need to be very conscious of that. Now I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to Ernie, who will deal with another aspect of the communication in teaching process. Ernie Kinney.
Thank you, Jim. What we're going to go into on my portion of this morning is mostly practice drills that we use in lead-ups in getting into a teaching situation. We like to establish a traffic pattern to get people into an area that we want to teach something like a right and left through. We'll say pass through and do a courtesy turn for maybe it's the first night. If they learn to do a pass through and a courtesy turn the first night, we start practicing that night on a right and left through. Pass through, do a courtesy turn. Maybe a week before we get ready to teach the right and left through, we say give a right to your opposite pull by and courtesy turn your partner. And lead into things like that. So the night we give it a name, the teaching process has already taken effect, and all we have to do is more or less talk the people into doing what we want them to do and tell them what they've done. We do the same thing with the square through. We use a lot of demo squares, and this lots of times is much better. People can learn much better by seeing than by listening. We assume that they haven't learned to listen yet, so we start working on this process, and we want to teach them moves, so we let them see what they're doing. So we use a demo square for practically everything. And if I could get Lanny up here for just a moment, we will demonstrate some of the hand moves that we use in teaching, like a partner trade and California twirl and things like this. We ask our dancers or our class members to use their hands as much as possible. All of us want them to hold hands, right? So we teach them to use their hands. If they're going to hold hands, then we want them to use them. Can you hear in the back? No. Can you hear?
It won't be on the paper.
Oh, how can I do this? You talk.
Thanks. This is a parrot.
That they hold hands. If if we're teaching a California twirl, we ask that the hands move back. The first move is with the hands.
The request is that the dancers hold hands at all times in dancing?
All possible.
All possible times. And that on a California twirl, the hands move back.
Move back.
As the man walks around the woman, the hands move back and continue on through.
First move is back.
The first move in hand move in a California twirl is back. Ernie, can I take your part and let you do this?
Takes care of that. The first move with the hand on a partner trade is back. The hands go through both hands, and this can be initiated by the right-hand dancer or the left-hand dancer. So then the flowing direction is started. So we have very little problems with teaching a California twirl or with teaching a partner trade. Whether it be boy-boy, girl-girl situation, we assume that it's a right-hand dancer and left-hand dancer. So, thank you. I was going to do a lot more, but since you took my... Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Thank you, Lanny. My wife, Lanny. And Jim Mayo. And friend. So we're going to have, we would like a demo square up on the stage. We don't have, our sound system is not here yet, but we're going to have to improvise. We'll have the band up here. If we could get 8 volunteers, 4 men and 4 women, or any combination thereof, to come up on the stage, we're going to, and Jack is going to need some too. So, it's no problem. We will assume that the dancers coming onto the stage have had a few lessons. We usually, while they're getting organized, we usually tell our dancers the first night we realize there's going to be a problem with listening, and we ask them to please listen to the caller. And we realize that some people who are will be hard pressed to learn to listen, and that are the doctors and the lawyers and the teachers and the dentists, and those people who are used to talking all the time will not be able to learn to listen very readily. We also ask that tell our dancers that the average dancer will learn to do a call, a movement, after hearing it 100 times. You can do it without thinking. Some, of course, this is average. Some, of course, it takes 50 times they learn it, the kids, you know. Some, it takes 150. And those it takes upward of 200 calls, 200 times hearing a call, usually become callers. We will assume that the heads have their run this way, okay? What we do, if we're getting ready to lead up to a square through, for example, and we all have problems with people courtesy turning. We kind of solve that this way by starting a traffic pattern. Now you realize we're going to be not passing the proper shoulders, but we do that later. We're assuming that the first night they have learned to do a pass-through. They have learned to identify their partner. And we, even though we have no definition for partner at the mainstream level, we must have one quick. I relate to my dancers that your partner is the person by your side facing the same direction you're facing, if you're in a static square as they are. You notice I didn't say your partner is the girl by your side, because we used to say that, but we never did tell the girl who her partner was. We used to tell your corner is the girl on your left, but we never did tell the poor lady who her corner was. But now we've got to identify partners. And if you're in a line of 4, your partner is the end and the adjacent center. The end and the adjacent center facing the same direction. Unless the caller says the center 4 do something, and then they become partners. But for the sake of what we have here right now, we're going to show you a little drill that we get into to start a traffic pattern for a square through. And we're assuming that they're going to know what I'm about to say. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Let's have the heads pass through and face your partner, and pass through and face your partner, and pass through, and face your partner, and pass through. We've established a traffic pattern for square through. All we've used is pass through, face your partner, pass through, face your partner. In the beginning, they won't do this too readily. You know, they'll be looking around for the one they brought. But we have to go back and relate to them that, look, the partner is the person by your side facing the direction you're facing. Now, we tell them they're now facing their corner. So with your corner, everybody pass through, face your partner, pass through, face your partner, pass through, face your partner, pass through, and do a U-turn back. And do an Alaman left your corner, or turn your corner to the left, and bow to your partner. Now, that's one little drill we use the first night. Another little drill we use the first night is this, because we don't want to get them in a habit of doing something the same way over and over and over again. Because if we do and they come out and I'm calling, I may give it to them a little bit different, and we've lost our dancers. Let's have the sides pass through, face your partner, and do a U-turn back. It doesn't hurt. We don't care, you know. This is maybe their first time that they've got to look at the same sex across from them. So we do the same little drill. Pass through, face your partner. Now look, we have a new partner. It happens to be the same sex. But that makes no difference. Pass through, face your partner. Pass through, face your partner. Pass through, face your partner. Pass through, do a U-turn back. Centers twice. Did you notice something about the definition? Do you know the definition of a U-turn back? It says you will always turn toward your partner, doesn't it? But did they do it right? It says yes, they did. It says you'll always turn toward your partner unless flowing direction dictates otherwise. Read the rest of the definition. So they did it properly. I was checking them. And here we can do something else. We can do a pass through, face your partner, centers. Pass through, face your partner, pass through, and do an Alaman left. Was that all right? They're out. So what? Who's out? The sides? Sides pass through and do a courtesy turn. Heads pass through and do a courtesy turn. Sides pass through and do a courtesy turn. Everybody pass through and do a courtesy turn. All right. Now, these are little drills. You all right? I don't care. Somebody get me out of this. These are little drills we use, and the dancers love them. They don't mind. They learn. My class members learn to do a courtesy turn with a girl turning a boy, and they don't laugh about it. It isn't funny to them. They don't know that there's any, that it's not right. So why not use it? They don't know that it is. They don't even giggle when a boy turns a boy. But that's a courtesy turn. The definition of courtesy turn says the left-hand dancer, parenthesis, man, or vice versa, man, parenthesis, left-hand dancer, will turn the lady, parenthesis, right-hand dancer. So I'm assuming that the parenthesis means R, right-hand dancer. And then that makes it legal for a boy to turn a boy and a girl. And we use that. Some say it's gimmick, some say it's not. But it depends on your interpretation. But this is one little drill we use, the drill for right and left through. Let's have the sides pass through and face your partner and pass through and courtesy turn the girl by your side. This is a little difficult for them right in the beginning because they want to reach out and get the one in front of them. So you always have to say the girl by your side. Now pass through and do a U-turn back twice. Whoops. That group wasn't as good as the other group was. And then do an Alaman left. Now if we're going to get a little further, we'll say the night we're ready to teach. The night we're ready to teach. And these are practice drills. We have let them look at some of these things with dancers before we get into them. We let them look at a square. We're getting into the time for the teach on a square through. Heads. Give a right to your opposite pull by and face your partner. Give a left pull by, face your partner. Give a right pull by, face your partner, and give a left pull by. Okay? They're now facing their corners. So we will repeat that. We will also do the same thing with same-sex facing and etc. Okay, give a right to your opposite pull by, face your partner, give a left pull by, face your partner, give a right pull by, face your partner, give a left pull by, and do a U-turn back. Very good. And do an Allemande left your corner. So, how many of you use little drills like this in teaching? Do you use drills? Do you start leading up the first night of class, leading people into things? You can trick people into learning, you know. Use any little trick, any little gimmick you got to teach them to dance. And at the same time, they're having fun. At the same time, the flow is there. And without music, it's kind of difficult. With the band play. Okay. I think the band is off beat. But these, Jack, would you like to use these same people? Don't go too far.
We're going to use couples, but if they are tired, well, we'll get others. But
Okay.
we do want a square.
Hi, thank you very much. You're a very good group. Thank you. You're excused for a moment. Jack may want some of you back, but we also have devised a little way. It's very, very simple to show our dancers a wheel and deal. We show our dancers a wheel and deal in lines of 4, facing all different walls. Not square, not lines facing each other, not lines facing out. We just get them in groups of 4 people and tell them to get in any line in any arrangement they want to. If they want to put 2 boys together, or 2 girls together, or however they want to do it, we just want them in lines, and we don't want them facing any certain wall. I mean, the line will all be facing the same wall, and we relate to them at this point that a wheel and deal can only be done by one line of 4. We can't wheel and deal anyone else's line but our line. So they're in groups of 4, and we get a lot of practice on wheel and deal this way. And any arrangement of dancers that they want. We don't care about that. We're trying to teach them to do the move, wheel and deal. And the way, after we show it to them by a demo square, and they seem to be having problems still, then I use my hands. And facing different walls. We will say that your line is facing the back wall. Look at my hands. My right hand is facing the back wall. My left hand is facing the back wall. My right hand represents the right hand couple of your line. My left hand represents the left hand couple in your line, and the right hand merely flops in front of the left hand. Just like that. It turns toward the center of your hand, and that's the end result of a wheel and deal, with the right hand couple in front of the left hand couple. Then you turn and you show these people facing this wall the same thing, and this wall. And they seem to get the idea pretty good by the use of hands. They can picture themselves as a right hand or a left hand, and they flow into it fairly readily. And to me, probably 2 of the toughest things to teach at the early stages of your mainstream or your basic program are the square through and the wheel and deal, and getting them to do them properly. Most of the other things we can talk them through. A difficult teach is a star through, but I have not thought of any lead up to teaching a star through. That's a sex-oriented call, which the girl has to do a certain thing and the boy has to do a certain thing. But if any of you have any lead-ups to teaching star-throughs and some of the other things, I would certainly appreciate it. We're having questions at the end of this for everybody. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ernie. We're pleased to return your glasses. Ernie's section of this program has been aimed at the lead-in preparation for teaching calls, how to preset the dancers in a learning mode to more easily accomplish the call when it's being taught. Jack is going to talk about the actual teaching process, and then the follow-on activity, the practice part of the teaching process. And it's important for you to note that there are more than one steps in the process of learning a call. We have not only the listening, hearing process, but also the preparation for learning, the preset, if you will, of the dancer attitude, attention, understanding, and then the actual teaching process, the mechanics of getting the dancers successfully through the action, and finally the practice part of it. And those latter two are the subject that Jack Murtha is going to talk to you about.
Thank you very much. And this microphone arrangement is going to be a little bit of a problem for me too. I don't know if I can yell loud enough to be heard on the mic, but I'm going to be working with dancers for a minute over here. Let me set the scene. We've followed the procedures that Ernie has advocated, and we now have a group of dancers who've learned some very important things about square dancing and about how to learn a new call in square dancing. And they're at a point in the lessons where we're now ready to teach one of the calls that I'm a little bit more careful about teaching than many of the ones, because I find errors occur in teaching this particular call. Now, in the materials that you were given in your packet, I went through and gave you some ideas about walk and dodge, so I'm not going to repeat that for you. You can read that in that material. We're going to take a different call, and I'll show you the processes that are involved as we try to put this together in our lesson. I'm going to need 4 couples again that will come up and help me here. So if there are 4 couples someplace down in the front over here that would volunteer to come on up, and just 4 couples that could come up quickly and help us form a square. One of the very important concepts in teaching is the concept of modeling. Now, you have to understand that modeling is different than a demonstration. A demonstration's what you do when you take a square of dancers and go out to put on a show for some other people you're not trying to teach. Modeling is something very different. Modeling means that I'm going to use these people to help you see and understand what it is I'm going to get you on the floor to learn in just a minute. I have to be very choosy. The modeling group has to be the best group of people I can get a hold of. I can't have any errors in my models, because some dancers will actually see the error and learn the error instead of learn what I want, so there can't be any. I don't leave it up to the dancers as to who's going to be my models. Those are hand-picked people. Now, the call that I'm going to be working with in this session is spin the top. So I get at my workshop a couple nights before, I tell my folks I'm going to need 4 couples at my next class meeting that can help me model a call. And I get volunteers, and then we work together, because I want them to know what I expect before I put them in front of my class. All right, so let me show you a couple of things that we're going to work on, and this is before they come to my class to model this for the class. I have a hard time here handling both things. Maybe this thing moves around a little. All right. I'll yell and hope that the mic will pick it up. First of all, for all of the people that are going to be helping me with this modeling, there are 2 important concepts I want carefully demonstrated. So let's have 1 and 3 step to the center, turn to face the corner, and step into an ocean wave. The call we're going to be teaching is spin the top. Now, a critical attribute of spin the top, one thing I want for sure, is continuous action. I want everybody in it to move from the time they start to the time they end with no break in their rhythm, no break in the footsteps. So immediately that says I don't teach spin the top by saying you turn by the right half and stop, the center's turn left and stop, and then you move up and stop. If I did that, I'd be modeling exactly what I don't want them to do, and they'd learn that. Huh? I'll have a little more? Okay. So, my first message to this group is that I want a very smooth, flowing action of spin the top with every one of the people moving their feet continuously from the time I start to the time I end. All right, do it one time for me. Spin the top, turn right, turn left 3/4, move up, and make a wave. Very good. All right, now again we're going to do another spin the top in the same requirement. Everybody's feet moving all the time. Spin the top, turn right, turn by the left 3/4, and the ends move up. Now, I'm going to divide you into 4 groups out there. This is group 1. This is group 1. All of you in the first part of this section, put your hand up. You're in group 1. I want you to know you're in that group. All the rest of you are in group 2. Put your hand up. All right. I'll use you in just a minute. All the people in group 1, I'm going to have you help me just a minute here. I want you to watch and see if all of these people, from the time they start, each of you pick anybody you want, but watch one dancer's feet. And I'm going to ask you at the end to signal to me whether their feet move continuously from beginning to end. All right, spin the top. Go. Now, if the people you watched move their feet continuously all the time, you're going to give me a signal right on. Okay, all these folks, signal. All right, now I see you didn't put your hand up. Does that mean you watched somebody whose feet did not move? No, you're okay. I watched your feet move. All right. Sorry, okay. Well, you don't have to watch mine in the modeling because I'm not modeling. But now I want everybody to watch what I'm asking you to watch. And I want you all to signal. If I don't see a hand raised, then I'm taking it you did not see somebody, they didn't do it well. A teacher's job is to catch people being right that you're teaching, not catch them being wrong. So our signals are all designed to look for them, the ones who do it right. And we want that feedback. I'm not going to try to pick out the ones that made a mistake. I'll work with them as I go along. We want to catch them being right. All right, now, the second thing I'm going to make a big point out of is that I don't want anybody's hands grasping anybody else's hands. I want the hands to be flat, palm to palm against each other, like this, so that you maintain the pressure, the hands together, without anybody grabbing a hold and not letting go of another dancer. So now this time, when you practice, I want your feet to keep moving, and I also want those hands to be open and flat. Ready? Spin the top. Turn right, turn left 3/4, and move up. Sorry, it is a little crowded. Now, these guys already know the action of spin the top. What they're getting... What they're getting is what I want my new dancers to see that they might not have done if I hadn't worked with them in advance. We're ready now. They now know what I'm going to ask them to do, and now we're at our class, and the class is all sitting out there looking for the first time at a call they've never seen before, they've never done before. And I've decided I'm going to model this call because I have very particular things I want done with it, and I want it done right. So I've got some people who can do it right, and we're going to start working with it. All right, now class, the new call tonight is spin the top, and it has a couple of features that I want you to watch. Number one, the end person is going to have one job in spin the top, and the center person has a different one. Now, this group is going to show you what each does. So all of you now watch any end person. Pick any end you want, and I want you only to watch that person. Ready? Spin the top. All right, now watch again, and I'm going to describe what the end's doing. Pick an end person, watch them, and I'll describe what they're doing while you watch it. Ready? Spin the top. Turn right. The center... New center, turn left 3/4 and move up. The end is going to turn into the center by the right, then make a 3/4 turn in the center by the left. One more time, watch the end. Ready? Go. Turn by the right, turn by the left 3/4. Now, while the end is doing all that, the center gets a different job. This time, watch the center. Everybody pick any center, but watch the center. Ready? Go. Turn by the right, turn by the left 3/4. Now, very important to doing this well is that no one stops from the time it starts to the time it ends. So this time, I want you to pick any one dancer, watch their feet. And you're watching to see if they have continuous movement from the time they start to the time they end. Ready? Spin the top. Turn by the right, turn by the left 3/4. And I'm going to do it tonight with you in very slow motion. The first few times we're not going to go very fast, and you have to do it so that we flow from one place to the next with no break in your continuous action. Now I'm going to call it very slow this time, and we're going to go at a very slow tempo. Ready? Spin the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Another thing that's important for you is to not take a hold and hang on to the hand of another dancer. Use the palm together that we've already taught and worked on in other calls, and just press your hand against the one that's next to you's hand, and keep contact, but let go as soon as you finish that part with that dancer. Ready? Spin the top. Turn by the right, turn by the left 3/4, and move on up. Now, Jim alluded to the fact that I can have a whole class of you sitting out there talking to you, showing you all this, and I know that some of you weren't paying a darn bit of attention. You didn't see what I showed you, and you didn't hear it, because you don't have very good observation techniques. In my class, that's always true. And in fact, often it's the one that needs it the most who was sitting there, their brain was someplace else, not on my stuff. So I have to do some things to make people watch and observe and listen. So now, this time, we're going to try again. I'm going to take the group 2 in the back there now. And this time, when I say spin the top, I want you to watch the hands. You observe the hands very carefully. And I want you to see if everybody keeps their hand open. If you see the person you're watching grab a hold of a hand like this, then when I have you give me the right-on signal, you're not going to put your hand up. All right? Here we go. Spin the top. Turn by the right, turn left 3/4, and move on up. All right, all of my group 2, put your hand up if the people you saw and were watching kept their hand open. Go. All right, I didn't see any that didn't have hands up, so it looks pretty good. Now, we have established 2 or 3 things, and I'm not going to take more time here because I think you're getting the general idea, but if I'm modeling, I'm going to select those things I want seen, and I'm going to talk about them, I'm going to show them, I'm going to really emphasize them. If I do this well, what's it going to do for me and for the class? It's going to mean that in one night or 2 nights, I'm going to teach this call so I have no errors in it from now on, instead of spending 10 weeks trying to deal with teaching it sloppy the first night and then dealing with the errors, the people who don't move up and the people who overturn and the people who grab a hold and hang on to hands and won't let go, and all of these errors that keep coming into class. So if I do it well with my modeling, I have a very good chance I'll have error-free dancing with this right from the very beginning. Now my group sits down, I bring up my class, and we start working. We go through the same process again, over and over again. Spin the top is a beautiful call to work with because it fits into the next thing I want to talk about very well. But I can do spin the tops one after another. And I want you to watch one thing that's very interesting about this. Watch this one person. We're going to do 4 spin the tops, and you notice what happens to him. Ready? Spin the top. Spin the top. Spin the top. There are only 4 possible places he could be in a spin the top, and he's gone through all 4 of them. Did you notice that? In doing it 4 times, one after another, he's done every single thing he can do from every place he can do it in that wave. And I can get mass practice like mad by just doing spin the tops one after another. All right. Spin the top. Okay, come on back to a regular wave, and we're back in the starting position. He's where he was in the first place. Okay, now, that's the concept of modeling. And when I talk about modeling, I'm not putting on a demonstration. I'm not doing something for your enjoyment. I'm demonstrating with the most pure possible model I can what I want you to do. And now, you've seen it. You'll have a chance to ask questions about it. My technique is going to be such I'm going to force you to keep responding to me and force you to watch and force you to listen, so you can't get away from that. You can't sit there and be a spectator. You've got to be with me and watching what I want watched. Now I'm ready, so the models are finished and I can go into my class. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That was a big help. Now, if you're going to do some modeling, the key thing you have to identify is what causes problems. What are the problems that are caused in doing spin the tops? Sometimes people tell me, and I experience, the problem is the end person doesn't move up. They turn, and then they stop, and they stand still, and you have to go out and hit them over the head and say, hey, move up. You got to move up that 1/4 position. So one thing I want to get out of the way in my modeling is that there is no stop. Nobody stops. It's continuous action for everybody. And my teaching must be that way. If I model and then teach that you turn by the right 3/4 and stop, now you turn by the left 3/4 and stop, and now you move up and stop, some of my dancers are going to think that's the way I'm supposed to do that call. And it'll carry into the way they dance it, and errors will occur. Also, we have some trouble sometimes because people say it's harder, or we don't have as much luck when we start a spin the top without a swing through in front of it. Well, we've done spin the tops over and over in our modeling and in our practice without anything in front of it. We want to isolate the call as much as we can and just do spin the tops, so it's very clear to everybody what that action is without confusing it with another action or requiring another action. So everybody now can do both the end and the center's part of spin the top. Now, the second part of what I...
Can we ask a question?
Yes.
Is it all right to ask
Sure.
a question? What I'd like to know is, you show just a right-handed wave for spin the top. At one point in your teach, do you then throw in it done from a left-handed wave?
I do, but I'm not as good about that as I should be. Our classes include left-hand movements, and I'm just getting into left square throughs and some of those now. It'll be quite a ways down the road, because when I teach something like spin the top and add it in, I want it done correctly, but I'm not going to take all the variations in the early stage of the game. So the left-hand versions will come later, but we will teach
that spin the top is not a right-hand movement?
I teach it just the way I just taught it 3 weeks ago with my beginners,
Yeah.
exactly as you saw it. It's a right-hand movement starting from a right-hand ocean wave, but I don't say it's a right-hand movement or a left-hand movement. We start from right-hand waves, and later we'll come in with a left hand. I don't teach both right and left at the same time, if that's what you're saying.
So what I'm saying, swing through is a right-hand movement, spin the top is not. That's
Well, swing through in our area, because it gets a little practice with it as a center starting movement from a left-hand wave, becomes a variation that comes later. I don't teach it when I'm teaching the general rule. It's something we'd bring in later. Yes.
Jack, just want to mention, since we're talking with spin the top right now, I use the lead-in form of teaching, which Ernie was just discussing earlier, for spin the top. And I use the 3/4 because in your definition of the spin the top, you told them to cast 3/4 and everything like that. I'll hold off teaching spin the top for about 2 weeks so I can teach the cast off 3/4 family. Teach them the 3/4 cast first, get them in ocean waves, teach them how to do the 3/4, and then lead into, like Ernie was discussing earlier, the spin the top. I find that's pretty effective teaching. The modeling is great, though. It does help, too.
That someone was trying to make is that by definition, anything that starts with spin is always ends turn the centers. And we don't teach it to be a right or a left. And that comes in handy when you're starting a spin chain through.
That's a subject to a lot of discussion, and I don't want to get into that, because it's something in the definitions area.
That was
but
the point they were trying to make.
That's not necessarily true, and it isn't the way that I handle it. So, but that's really in another field than modeling right now, and I'd like to keep our questions on modeling. Okay.
It's been pointed out to me that we should, when we address the microphone, begin by telling who we are and where from. I'm Bill Peters from San Jose, California. I'm a little confused between Ernie's presentation and yours, Jack. There seems to me a division here, and it's a critical issue. Ernie started out by indicating that in a square through, for example, he at the very outset, the very beginning, through very clever technique, gets people to doing square throughs in all arrangements, all positions, same sexes, courtesy turns, and all that kind of thing. And you just indicated that your preference is, in a move like spin the top, to just do it in a standard way for a while and not get into the variations at the beginning. That seems to be a little bit at cross purposes.
Okay. I don't feel that it's at cross purposes because basically Ernie was saying I do a whole lot of things without naming the call and without doing the call as it's written to prepare people so they're ready to do the call when I introduce it. And I do the same thing. I do a lot of things as we go along that prepare people so when I finally get to spin the top, there are some things that they already have done, like three-quarter turns and a lot of three-quarter movements, fractional movements, so they're precise about them, they're careful about them, so that we get involved with a number of things like that. So I do lead-ups, if that's what you're saying. Ernie was addressing how you prepare before you teach initially, and I certainly use a lead-up program.
If I may just interject, I think there's still a misunderstanding about the question. I believe what Bill was driving at is that there are two different approaches being represented. One is that you teach all the variations of a call the first time it's taught, or very early in the teaching process. The other is that you teach a basic form of it and then add on the variations at some later stage in the teaching process. Is that the difference that you were addressing, Bill? That, I think, is a fact of life, and I don't personally see any need to say that one method is better than the other. However, it is clearly important that nothing in the teach of the single presentation be in contradiction with any of the ways in which the action can be done. If you're going to teach spin the top, and I think you do intend to teach that the action definition is ends turn into the center and then the center's turn. It is not an action which always starts with the right hand.
Oh, is that? Oh, okay.
That's the point I think people were driving at.
All right.
And indeed, teaching by definition, as a variation of dancing by definition, means that you should not, and I think nobody here will argue with the issue, that you should not teach a spin the top as a right-hand turn followed by a left-hand turn. Its definition is ends turn to the center and then centers turn in the center, regardless of which hand that requires. I think that's the distinction that was being raised, and my personal view is that we cannot resolve the issue, nor should we, that one method of teaching is to teach all of the variations at once, and the other is to teach variations over an extended period of time insofar as you teach them. But now, since we got some questions, let's deal with the questions, and then we'll let you get back to the second half of your presentation. Could you please make them short, because he does have some other important things he'd like to say. Francis, I think you're next.
Francis Eller from Kansas. I pretty much agree with the way you teach there, Jack, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people here that do not agree with you, because as you gave the demonstration there, you've done it with hands up, palms up, and there's a lot of places that I call when I'm not in my area or on the West Coast that don't do that. They don't dance with their hands up. And you know that, and probably Jim knows it more than anybody, because you ain't going to tell those people on the East Coast they're supposed to dance an ocean wave with their hands up. The other thing that I wanted to say that about spin the top, that I'm sure most of you probably know, but there's some of you don't, that no matter how many times you do a spin the top, you always come back to the same person. You can do it one time, you can do it 4 times, you can do it 400 times, and every time you do a spin the top, you'll come back to the same person that you had a hold of when you started it.
That's a useful piece of additional information.
You bring up another good point that I don't want to lose here. I'm not really... What my presentation right now is on the importance of modeling a call that you're going to teach where errors may, your experience tells you some errors may occur. I'm not advocating one way or another with spin the top. Each of you will have to define what you want with spin the top. I'm showing you what I did. But if you have a difference of forearms down instead of hands up, that's, build that into the way you do it. What I'm telling you is that if you decide to model something, then it must be modeled very carefully, exactly as you want it, the best you can do by the best dancers you can get, and it must encompass the critical attributes that you're concerned about. My concern was the hand and the continuous action of the feet, so my model includes that. If your concern is forearm grips, or your concern is some other aspect, build it in. I'm not trying to teach you how to teach spin the top. I'm trying to teach you how to teach any call where you decide errors sometimes occur and models are necessary to help everybody understand what you want done.
Let me also point out that the purpose of this gathering is to talk about methods of communication in teaching, not to debate the issues of hands up or hands down, and I would urge you not to get into those details in this forum. There is a place in CALLERLAB for that discussion, but this isn't it. Who's next? You're next, I think.
Jim Sudborough from Portland, Oregon. As long as we're on the subject of spin the top, I would like to know why that we never call, and I'm talking about square dance singing calls, we never call spin the top followed by a swing through and a right and left through. It's always the other way around. Why is that?
I think that's not an appropriate subject for this discussion. We're not on the subject of spin the top. We're on the subject of teaching communication. And I would again urge you not to raise those issues in this forum. There is a place, the mainstream committee, the Dance by Definition committee. Ernie has an opportunity to discuss that kind of thing a great deal. But we can go on forever and never talk about teaching communication if we get into those discussions here.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Down back.
Jack Willis in Seattle. Jack, is in modeling the spin the top, is it not adding something to the potential confusion of the people watching it to have 8 dancers there doing a 4-dancer movement?
Not in the way that I'm going to introduce it to them, because we'll introduce it as an 8-dancer movement, and we'll also do practice with it as a 2 couples in the center working with it. So it doesn't confuse my dancers. Now, it might, if you're not going to use it that way, if you only use it with 2, then that's your model. Set your model up to just show with 2 dancers in the center of the square between 2 couples. First and third do it, second and fourth do it. Whatever you want to do in the model. You know, however you want to teach, it's up to you. The key point is that whatever you do and say is modeling has to be well done and has to really show what you want done.
Yes.
I'm Dan McCornack from Eugene, Oregon. At what point and to what extent do you relate the name of a basic to the demonstration?
I generally give them the name as we start learning the call. So I'll tell them the call we're going to model, the call we're going to work on tonight is spin the top. And then as we get descriptively through the practice period, I'll start using spin the top. Now, Ernie would be a better one to react to that because he's got a very definite progression he goes through on a 3 or 4 week basis relative to how much extra descriptive help he gives his dancers. So maybe that's a good question for him to relate to. And why don't we save that just a minute, Ernie, and then get him to talk to that, because that's a good point. He can give you some good information. Stu?
Stu Shacklett from Brandenburg, suburb of Louisville. 2 things that I find extremely successful in my teaching process, going back to something that Ernie was talking about. I use a preparatory command where I give them a direction or a location, and then as I progress through the teaching process, I drop the preparatory command. For instance, when I first start the first night with an element left, I'll say the gents face left, girls face right, stick out your left hand, element left. The next time or the next night I might drop gents face left, girls face right, and just say face your corner and element left. And then after I do this for a while, then I drop that and just say element left. So it's a building process where I drop the preparatories as I progress through the sequence. And then on the spin the top, as Francis mentioned, if they can identify that ending position with the same person they're going to start with. And I like to identify beginning positions as relation to where they're going to end. And if they can visualize that, many times like you get into the spin, chain the gears, spin, relay the deucey, or spin chain through, if you can identify ending positions for them, they know they start here and they're going to end up there, then they can sort of see how this thing moves. And I use that a lot in my
Do you do that in modeling? You do
Yes.
that when you're modeling before
Yes.
you have the dancers come up and try it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, that's the whole point, that modeling is a very important way of communicating what you want to many of your dancers, and I'll explain more detail in a minute, some other reasons for that being so important. I'm going to speed this up because I've run out of my time already here, and we do want to have time for questions and answers with both Ernie and I. The other point, there's three things I wanted to talk to you about that are very important concepts when you teach somebody something. The first is modeling, and we've covered that. Second is the idea of practice. Practice does not make perfect. You hear people say that all the time, but that's just not true. Practice makes permanent. And you want to be sure you understand the difference. That if you practice an error, you'll do it that way forever. Just because you practice something 10 times, if you don't practice it correctly, then you could build in an error that you'll never get rid of. So practice makes permanent. When you plan your practice for something like spin the top, there are two kinds of practice that are important. One's called mass practice. Mass practice means you generate as many practice tries as you can in a short period of time, all error-free. You really work hard to not have any errors in the first trials of a new person with a new call. Any error can give you a lot of problems later, and you try hard to keep them out of those first experiences. Like spin the top, I'd want to go through spin the top so every person maybe did 10 or 12 practice tries with spin the top, getting both of the two parts I'm going to emphasize in that first practice exposure. I might mass practice again a second night and have a lot of practice tries in a short time. When I perceive that I now have everybody doing spin the top correctly every time I call it, I no longer have errors, I've reached a point in learning we call overlearning. And when we start working in doing more spin the tops beyond that, we're building in a permanent memory that even if you later didn't do spin the tops for a long time, will still be residual and you can pull it out. The more overlearning, the better. But massed practice has the interesting kind of problem that you learn more rapidly, you learn more quickly, but you forget more quickly and you forget more rapidly. If all you do is mass practice, then people will know the call while you're practicing it, and for a little while after, then they'll forget it. All you have to do is look at divide. Many of us mass practice divide when we come to it on the list, then we don't call it anymore. And you go out and try to use divide on the floor and people have forgotten it. So there's a second kind of practice. It's called distributed practice. Distributed practice is what's required if you're to retain something. If you're to remember it for a long time, you must get into distributed practice. And the best combination is that you mass practice a call like spin the top, then you make a practice schedule for the next 12 months, and you deliberately schedule in on a distributed basis another return to practice and put back in spin the top. You never let it go. After you've done an effective job of distributed practice, it can be built in to where nobody will ever forget it. They'll have it forever. So you have to remember, if you only mass practice something, then you will teach it faster, but you also build in the opportunity to forget it more quickly. The last thing that I have on this form is talking about learning rate. Learning rate is a very interesting thing. If I were to just take the first 4 rows of people here and say, come on out, we're going out to the hotel tennis court and we're going to set up some lessons and teach you tennis. Before I ever started, I don't even know who they are, before I ever started, I know that I have a learning rate spread in that group of about 1 to 6. Now that means if I'm going to teach you how to hit a forehand stroke, I have somebody in this group that's going to learn how to do that error-free and accurately with maybe 10 practice tries. And if he does it in 10, then I don't know who it is, but I know I've got at least one person in that group that's going to take 60 practice tries, 6 times as many, to get to the same skill level as my first guy. I have an automatic learning rate spread in almost every class of 1 to 6. Now, the interesting thing about learning rate is that the research originally thought that was genetic. Some people just took more time to learn than others. Now the research says it's really not tied to genetics at all. It's much more carefully tied to your prior experience. If everybody starting the class has exactly the same entry-level requirements for the class, that learning rate spread drops to 1 to 1.5. And that means, and all of you have experienced it, it doesn't take you as long to teach a plus dancer a call like spin, chain, and exchange the gears. You get your whole class doing it almost all together. There's not one person who's real slow about learning it and another real fast. The whole class learns it together because they all came to you with the same entry-level skill, so you could build on it. But the first night of class, here's all these guys out here. Some have played tennis someplace before. Some have never had a tennis racket in their hand before. So as a teacher, I know that's going to be there in my class, and I have to deal with it. If I do a quality job of teaching in the initial presentations, by the time I get through with my mainstream program, I'm going to start plus with a much less spread out learning problem. If I can take care of those entry-level skills with a quality job in the mainstream program, I'm going to narrow that from 1 to 6 to 1 to 1.5. And almost be able to move my whole class together from there on. Now, the last thing I just want to mention, and I'll cut off. There's some new research that I think has got great implications for square dancing. And I don't know a lot about it yet, but how it applies to us, but it's fascinating to me. Research now indicates that what we thought were two hemispheres of the brain that worked in identical fashion, they don't. We now have a lot of research that indicates the two hemispheres of the brain in most people process information in very different ways. And many of us have one way dominant over the other. It's kind of like left and right hand. If I were to walk around here and shake hands or pick up a glass or open a door, my preference would be almost always do that with my right hand. That's my dominant hand. Somebody else out there probably would prefer to do it with your left hand. Our brain works the same way. Some people prefer to process information with the left hemisphere, some with the right, and they're very, very different. I feel that one of the interesting things about square dancing is that a good square dancer, a good caller, must be able to work with both sides almost at the same time. The two functions are critical to good square dancing. And Ernie mentioned the problem of teaching doctors and college professors to square dance, and I've run into the same thing. I have them, and I've kind of characterized square dancing as sort of an intellectual activity. And I think, these guys are so sharp, they should have no problem learning to square dance, and they have a miserable time. Well, the reason I'm finally coming to understand is that their whole education and everything is dominated by left hemisphere types of processing information. Very analytic, very sequential. It's on a cognitive scale that does certain things with information, but they don't have a very good way of handling what the right hemisphere brains do, and that's critical to becoming a good square dancer. So that we have to know how to teach to both hemispheres of the brain if we're going to do a good job for all the people. Now, I don't want to pursue some of those further, but I would like you just to understand there's a whole lot of dimensions that a caller who's learning to teach can think about and ought to be informed about to make you a more effective and a better teacher. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. It seems that you're telling us, Jack, that CALLERLAB should probably issue a grant of $500,000 or so to some research organization to investigate the right-left brain issue. Wouldn't that be nice? If any of you have questions, by all means, do step up to the microphones. We'd like to get a discussion going. Just for openers, let me ask one, Jack. It's been my practice to use the checklist that most of us have as a teaching guide, and the effect of this is to make my distributed practice, in fact, turn out to be once a week. I try very hard to get everything that I've taught in the last 15 or 20 calls that I've taught, at least, to be used every week. Does the fact that I do it every week rather than constantly increasing the gap diminish the success of my distributed practice?
Not if you, in fact, get error-free practice every week. You're not going to diminish it at all, and it'll be distributed practice because there are time gaps between it. But what you run into is guys who get into the Plus program or into some of these others all of a sudden have more calls on that list and more variations that they're working with than they can get into every practice session. And then you're all of a sudden forced to say, well, I'll quit doing do pasos from circles, or I won't do a divide tonight. And so all of a sudden somebody calls do, pa, so from a circle and the whole square breaks down because you got it off your list for distributed practice and did not get far enough with a distributed practice for retention.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know who was there first, but let's try the front mic.
All right, Gene Trimmer from Paragould, Arkansas. First, my compliments to both of you on your presentation, and to Jim for making sure you guys stay on the mic for those people who's buying the tapes. Question I have is, in your modeling situation, do you identify for these new dancers, either in your modeling situation, or do you wait until you get the new dancers on the floor? Do you identify position formation for them?
I teach by definition, and my interpretation of definition, as an example in Spin the Top, there are only two things to learn, and that's what I teach. I don't try or make any attempt anymore to have them do those in a lot of different formations. I want to know that they can do the center part and they can do the end part. And then in my calling and in my practice later, if I need to, I'll practice with them, but I do enough of that kind of thing with all my calls that generally, if I teach them well how to do the center part and the end part, I can put them in all kinds of positions and they'll do it. I don't have to practice.
But you do not identify formation for them?
When you say formation, that this is parallel ocean waves?
Parallel ocean waves, or
these
right
are
angles, or right
end-to-end
angles
ocean
to the
waves? Yes, I
wave,
identify
or
that, although
like
I don't necessarily identify it when I'm teaching Spin the Top. We've already been doing these things quite a bit. But I want them to know and to recognize the formations that we work in, yes. I'm doing more of that, in fact, than I used to.
Yes.
Yes, Leslie Alone from Hawkeye, Iowa. I find that if I tell people where the figure starts and where it ends, it's much easier for them to understand it. And I did not understand that you do that. Am I right or wrong?
That wasn't emphasized in the presentation, but let me volunteer an opinion on that. One of the problems that I see in our teaching is dancers who always expect a call to end in the same formation. Wheel and deal being one of these from a two-faced line, dancers have built in the conviction that that ends in an 8-chain through box formation. If you do it from a tidal two-faced line, you have real troubles persuading them to end in a line because they have a built-in preconceived identity for the ending position. So yes, I need to teach the ending position, but I need to be sure that they understand it can be in several different formations.
Oh, right, but what I was saying is when you first teach this, I think it's a good time to say, okay, it starts here and ends here.
My
in this
response
position.
to you is yes, I do identify start and end, and I emphasize it by having no stop through the figure, but a stop at the end of it before we go into a next one. When I'm first practicing and when my model here, you notice after every Spin the Top we stopped. I didn't try to model going into another call because I want them clearly to know where that starts and stops, and I do agree with Jim. If I'm not careful enough to take care of the formations that are going to feel different, then I may have a problem with that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Lois Wolfson, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thanks to Ernie Kinney, 2 years ago I started using a model square for everything they learn, including styling. But Jack, I like to have my entire club involved in the model square. So what I do, I have one dancer pick out the model square for the following week. I don't even know who they are, but they have to be there 20 minutes early, 10 after 7. And I work with them for 20 minutes so they won't be embarrassed and they'll know exactly what I want, and my dancers are there watching. But I see there might be jealousy there, so I involve my entire club, but I do work with them.
You've covered all the bases. The key things I'm telling you not to do are do not allow someone else to pick your models if you don't have time to train them and be sure they're right, and don't try to use somebody you don't know is going to do it error-free. There can be no chance in modeling that they're going to make a mistake and model what you don't want modeled when you put them in front of the class. So you've covered all the bases. There's no problem with that.
I go maybe a little further than Jack. I call them demo squares, but I ask them to dress properly when they come to do a demonstration for my class. I want them all dressed properly.
We've got another question coming to the microphone.
We wanted Ernie to talk a little about his progression, because it's something like Stu's, but maybe even a little more how you work to get rid of the directional kinds of things.
Just a second, a quick comment. Jerry Murray from Minnesota. I just wanted to emphasize one point that I was impressed with, Jack. Yeah, and at no time did Jack ever mention boys and girls in that teach. And I think everybody needs to understand that. He didn't mention boys and girls.
That's because it's a sexless call, right?
That is an important part of the model, and I did that on purpose. That's right.
I don't know what I'm commenting on. What was the question?
Ernie, the question was, somebody mentioned that you teach for a while giving directional help, but then pretty soon all you say is the label. And don't you have that on a regular kind of 3-week or 4-week schedule? The first week you really help a lot, but eventually get to the point where you only say the label and nothing else? Or
I teach this way, if that makes any sense to you. We progress, but we always go back. On my first night, say that I'm teaching a square through, I read the definition. After we've established a traffic pattern, I do not depend on memory to relate a definition to my dancers, because some of them don't remember anyway, and not that I'm senile, but I forget sometimes, and I leave out a little thing. So they usually have a copy of the definitions, and I let them know what I'm planning to teach next week, and they pretty well go through the definitions themselves. Then when time comes for the teach, everything's established. The traffic patterns are there and everything is there, and I say, now we're going to do a square through. Here is the definition of a square through. We give them the starting formation, the ending formation, what they're going to be looking. They're going to be doing the boys are going to be a quarter left face turn, usually if it is a static square, and the girls a quarter right face turn will be the ending formation. Then we go back and we give them their hands again, and we say, now look, we've been doing this for 2 or 3 weeks now, so this is very easy, isn't it? This is a square through. Consequently, we've had no problem with the courtesy turn anywhere in the square through. And so this is up to you. Method of teaching anything, I would not argue. If your method is foreign to mine, that's no problem with me. I was a school administrator for many years, and I never argued with teachers over their method as long as they reached a point at a given time, and that's the same time I could get there. If your method is not working, then it's time to look around and change a little. To the problem of spin the top and swing through, if you noticed on, not commercial time, but one of the companies that records records occasionally will have square through 4 hands and spin the top in their figure, instead of swing through and spin the top and do a right and left through and square through 3 and swing your corner. But ordinarily, as far as recording is concerned, and putting spin the top ahead of swing through and things like this, we try to keep them as simple as possible. Usually if a caller sends in a real difficult figure to me, I just send him a card, say KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. So we try to keep all our singing calls simple and let you guys put the degree of difficulty you want with them. Thank you.
Do we have any further comments or questions? Mike, are you going to try to get to a microphone? I'll repeat it. Make it, Mike Terzoff from Massachusetts, make it short so I can repeat it easily, please. A lot of what we've been saying depends on having good, reliable club members in the club. He finds that the teens in his club are not good modelers.
I work with schools all the time, and our standard procedure is if a teacher wants to teach square dancing, we ask her to generate 8, either 1 or 2 squares of the best students they've got. They meet with me after school for whatever number of nights it takes till they do everything perfect, and they become the modelers for her. And in your situation, I'd do the same thing. I'd pick 4 couples of my best teens, and we'd go someplace and practice until they did it very well, and then they could model for the class. The only thing I would not do is ask them to come out of the audience like this and be my models unless I had a call that I knew had no critical problems and was very simple. I do use class members to model or demonstrate, really to demonstrate calls. They get up and they show it to the rest when it's a simple call like a do-si-do, or if I'm having problems with that promenade hand position or something like that. I'll bring them up and have them demonstrate. But they're not models. That's a different story. I practice in advance with models. I don't necessarily have to practice with demonstrators.
Yes, Bob Osgood from California. I have a different thought on the concept of error-free teaching. I have yet to find a class that I have ever taught where the acceptability of teaching a brand new activity is unanimous. I find it far more separated than 1 in 6. And I think that if I were to stand and teach a group of people until the slowest one got it, that I would bore the fastest ones to pieces. Now, let me give you a concept of this thing. A caller is committed. A dancer comes in to look for a joyful, friendly, fun activity. Errors don't bother me because I know at the bottom line I'm going to have them all corrected. And I may do it at different times. I also know the same thing with dancing by definition. Before the period is through, before that program, basic program, mainstream is over, all this will be taught. But giving the dancer an opportunity to dance, whether he's dancing error-free or not, to me, is giving the dancer the quickest entry into a fun-filled activity. If he has to stand up there for a long time, will I be sure that he gets it absolutely perfectly? To me, is a problem. So I don't say you're taking the joy out of it, Jack, and what you're saying. I just like to think that you're putting the joy in it first. And if it takes a little while and you get a few people doing it incorrectly, to my way of thinking, that's par for the course, because you're going to lick it the next time. You're going to work on it a little differently. And the error will not become permanent. The error will not become permanent. I'd like to know how many things that in life we all have done incorrectly until we were corrected. But to let it go on indefinitely, certainly it would be permanent. I congratulate both of you guys for doing a good job.
Jerry Seeley, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. How much do you use mixers in your beginner class when you're teaching new figures?
I generally start people with their own partners, but we try to mix in our class at least once a night and sometimes more than that, either through circle mixers, or I just have people promenade to another square or move them to other squares or chain them. So we try to get them to the point where they dance with other people within our group, not just feel that they can only dance with their own partner.
That's about the same as we do. One note on that, a club that I call for but don't teach the class for came to me complaining about their class teacher because he set into a practice where dancers the first night did not dance with their partners at all, and in fact made frequent use of Yellow Rock or Alaman Y or however you do it, and it represented a major problem and set a fair number of people away from the class. Their success rate in recruiting, the people who came the first night and stayed, was quite low, and they were very unhappy about that. So with mixing, we need to be very careful about how we deal with the dancers when they are mixed. This has got to be the last question because we're going to run off the end of the tape in just a minute.
All right, Bill Stone, Washington State. I have deleted your problem in mine. I start each class, whether it be mainstream, plus or advanced, the first thing they do at night at my classes is to join in a big circle. We do an Alaman left from that circle, and from then a right and left grand 5 hands, pick up the lady that you have, and this is your partner at that moment. We now have deleted the discussion between husband and wife, you did it wrong, you did it right, you didn't help me thing, and we teach in this particular, that's in all of mine. Very easy thing to do in the promenade, to continue on with things as you've said, is to have every other couple step up alongside the couple ahead of you It's very amazing how fast they take this on and become a line. If then, as Ernie explained with the hand, we can do a wheel and deal from this line of 4. Nobody's in a square with anyone else. You wheel and deal to face the opposite wall, as he said, and explaining it the same way. Everything is taught as couples from the couples. If during the evening another couple comes in to the hall, which they normally do a slightly later, during the first tip only, or the first set only, is taught from this circle. When they come in, they either pick another couple up and get into the group, or if we're in a promenade position, at that time they simply step into the line or the circle to circle left. From this, starting in that manner, that's always done the first tip of the evening. From then on out, the rest of the evening goes similar to yours.
Teaching in circles is a very effective technique that can be used in any situation, as you pointed out. We thank you all for your participation and your attention. We hope you found it a useful program. Thank you, Jack and Ernie.